Welcome to Life Rebounding. I want to continue to reflect on the phrase from Margaret Silf's book, Inner Compass, where she says, "How I am, however broken, is a place of grace." And I want to just put my own reflection to that, and that would be this: how I am, however broken, is only a limitation to me, not to God. And let me read to you these verses from Philippians 4, verses 12 and 13, where Paul writes, "I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength." And of course, he was speaking of Jesus as the one who gives him strength to be able to face all circumstances. And that's a great word for us when we think about our lives. How we are, however broken, is only a limitation to us, not to God. Now let me explain that a little bit. When I first went to California to go to study at Fuller Seminary in the Doctor of Ministry program, my first trip out there, and one of the first days after class, I went into the library, which was reserved for the D-Min students, and I looked at this bookcase full of dissertations of students who had gone before me. And I made the mistake of pulling a couple of them down and taking a look at them. And then I found myself just sort of collapsing in a chair and saying, "Oh boy, what have I gotten myself into? I can't do this. There's no way on God's green earth I can write this kind of dissertation. I can do this kind of work. I'm just a hick from Cape Breton. I'm not somebody who is academically inclined like this. How in the world could I ever do this?" And no sooner were the words out of my mouth or the thought expressed in my mind when I heard the Lord say to me, "How did you get here?" And I paused and I thought, okay, I got here by God's grace and his providence. Now, the background behind the story is, in my first church, a couple of colleagues had started to study at Fuller Seminary, and I liked what I saw happening in their lives and in their churches. And I said to myself, I want to learn what these guys are learning. And so eventually I applied to the program. My scholarship history was such that they took me in not as a fully accredited student, but I had to sort of apprentice my way in. I needed to prove myself, and so there I was at my first class in the library afterwards, and I realized that I wasn't there on my merits. Now, I also was there not by my own financial providence either. I was there because God had provided the financial means for me to be there. So both academically and financially, I didn't get there by myself. I was very limited on both ends. But as God asked the question, "How did you get here?" I had to answer, "Well, I got here because you got me here." And his response was, "And how do you suppose you're going to do this work?" And I realized the only way I was going to get any of the work done was by his grace. One of the reminders that I come to on a fairly regular basis is that I have a lot of limitations in my life, but they're not limitations to God. He sees my limitations as his opportunity. He's not limited at all by my weakness. He's not limited at all by the things I don't think I can do. As a matter of fact, I think sometimes when I say, "I don't think I can do that," he says, "Well, I'll show you. We'll do it together." And one of the things I've discovered, and it's a biblical principle that Paul talks about in his writings in the New Testament, is that my weakness becomes a platform for his strength. It becomes his opportunity to show himself through me. And so when I say how I am, however broken, is only a limitation to me, not to God, what I want you to hear is I'm not, and you're not, and should not be governed by our limitations. Instead, we're governed by the grace of God that allows us to say, okay, I've got limitations, but that's not the end of the story. He can do more through our limitations. He can do more through our weakness than I dare say we can do through our strength. That's certainly been the story of my life, that God can do more through my weakness than he can through my strength. In my seasons of brokenness, when I've owned them before others, the surprise ending for me has not been that people said, oh boy, what a nutcase, I'm not going to hang out with him anymore. The response has usually instead been, okay, I'm ready to listen now because he's speaking my language. He's living where I've lived. And I just want to encourage you today that where you are, how you are, however broken you may be, is not a limitation to God. How you are, however broken, is only a limitation to you, not to God. And so I pray today that you will discover that Paul's word is true, that you can do all things through him who gives you strength, and that's Jesus Christ. And I pray that you may experience the fullness of that today in your life.